Ladies and gentlemen, it is time! CCW Digital is thrilled to present today's webinar on tips for winning the cloud customer service game, brought to you by Bright Pattern. When we talk about competing on the customer experience, we're often using it to create pressure. We're basically telling you, if you don't focus on the customer experience, if you don't deliver a great one, you're going to fall behind. There's a real fear element to it, right? And while it is all true, you should be afraid if you're not caring about the customer experience. I don't really like that framing. It feels unfortunate. It feels too negative. Why not focus on the positive? That if you deliver a great experience, you can win the competition. You can win more customers. You can win the business results that you're looking for. Now, that all sounds great. It sounds very positive, very exciting, very rhetorically and entertaining. But how can you actually get there? How can you actually deliver that great experience that's going to help you win? That's what we're going to be answering today. And yes, as you can see from the title, we're definitely going to be discussing it from the standpoint of cloud technology. But this isn't merely a move your contact center to the cloud kind of sales pitch sort of situation. We're going to be looking at a variety of customer trends and demands, and then a variety of operational and strategic tactics that you can use to meet those demands better than your competitors are doing. Cloud will simply be a mechanism for making these initiatives happen. Now, we're not just going to talk about the theory. We're not just going to talk about technology. We're also going to share some case studies that prove mid-sized businesses in particular can compete against the big dogs by elevating their customer experience. These companies will be able to deliver service with bite to match the bark, and they prove that this concept is really working. But that's enough of my hype, and that's enough of my strange dog metaphors. Let's dive into today's webinar. And as a reminder, you can submit questions at any time using the console on your screen. Many of you surely recognize my voice, but if you don't, I'm Brian Cantor. I'm the Principal Analyst for CCW Digital. I lead all of our content and research endeavors here at CCW Digital, as well as within the broader customer management practice. I'm joined today by Ted Hunting, the Senior Vice President of Marketing from Bright Pattern. Ted previously worked at Genesis, where he actually spent 14 years, and he was also a past member of the CCW Advisory Board. Within Genesis, he most recently ran their North American marketing and is obviously excited to be part of Bright Pattern now. So, Ted, how are you?
Brian, I'm doing great. Thank you. Great introduction.
Appreciate that. Appreciate having you here. I know that this is a passionate area for you, not just thinking about the ways technology can empower a great experience, but just the idea of a great experience, right? That idea that this is something that is so pivotal to success in today's era. And the fact is, while it seems so obvious and it seems like there's so many easy concepts and easy objectives to set, actually delivering it tends to elude organizations. Sometimes it's mindset, sometimes it's inertia, but oftentimes that organizations are making mistakes tactically, and I think you're going to walk through both of those. You're going to calibrate our mindset, but then obviously dive into the specific steps they can take to really achieve success, and we're really thrilled for that. And so, yeah, very much looking forward to today's webinar. So, Ted, I want to give you a chance to actually walk us through today's agenda as we get started in providing tips for mid-sized businesses to win the customer service game.
Okay, awesome, Brian. So to start things off, just a few things we're going to talk about today. The first one is, I know we want to keep it very positive, as you mentioned, but I almost wanted to start with a little bit of a stake in the ground, because I think actually, we're going to talk about the current state of customer service, and I think one of the things we've seen is people have talked about frictionless, easy, personal customer service for years. Omnichannel has been thrown around and used by so many different companies, but the reality is customer service is still not where it needs to be. So I wanted to really start with a little bit of an overview on where we are in some of the current situation. And it might be a little bit dramatic, but I almost feel that customer service in many ways has failed. We're not where we need to be. Consumers are not where they want to be, and companies are not where they want to be. The good news, though, is like mid-sized companies are actually in a position to win, and we'll talk a little bit more about that because I think they actually have some advantages over the bigger companies, which we'll get into. And then from there, we'll actually get into really the meat, the things that are really keys, because I'd like to make sure everybody here attending today walks away with a few keys or maybe tips that they can use maybe now and maybe in the future. So we'll talk about sort of some tips to win if you're a mid-sized business in the cloud customer service game. And then from there, we'll just give a few examples, a few customers who are doing it today to show what's possible. Started, point number one, customer service has failed. And what do I mean by that? A really interesting study that was done recently, last year or so. So Bain, and actually the father of the Net Promoter Score, they did a study and they showed that 80% of CEOs believe they offer a great customer experience. But when they actually talked to consumers, like you and me, they found that only 5% of customers agree. And I think a big part of it is customers today, they want that effortless, that frictionless personal service, and they want it across all channels. They're looking for self-service. Everyone wants self-service, but they don't want it to be a high-effort, high-friction IVR. They're looking for easy self-service. They're looking for a choice of channels, digital, existing ones like chat, and some of the new emerging ones like Facebook Messenger. And then a key point is really they want it to be where they are, mobile. Like think if you want to check on an order when you're on a train heading into San Francisco and you can't really talk to everybody because there's 9 million people around you. So this ability to do it mobile in a mobile environment. And we're actually even seeing that one of the recent studies I read just in the last month shows that mobile carriers is actually expected to grow about 40% this year. So keeping it mobile as well. And then if you look at, where are companies though? Companies are actually very behind the game, especially the big ones. So if you look at some of the studies done by CCW, IQPC, as well as some of the other industry analysts, only 5 to 10% of companies today are doing true omnichannel. And when I mention true omnichannel, there's a lot of confusion about it. So just to give sort of a quick snapshot, so true omnichannel is when you actually can maybe start in one channel, and then as you switch between the channels, all the context and all the information is carried across the channels so the consumer can have a seamless, easy conversation. So whether it's for service, whether it's for sales, hey, I wanted to check on, where's that big screen TV I ordered, and maybe you text the company that, and you previously were chatting with them. So having the ability to have that seamless conversation across channels and omni-channels. And unfortunately, only 5 to 10% of companies are doing it today. And then another study from a pretty major industry analyst found that 60% of companies are totally siloed. And then many different companies, different analysts, have really shown that CX, the measures of NPS and CX, have really not improved in the last 3 years. So when I talk about customer service failing, it's actually improved in pockets, and there's a lot of companies doing some great things. Actually, a lot of mid-sized companies are some of the most innovative, but we're seeing there's a long way to go. Here's a great quote. This is actually from CCW, and this talks about, customers are not simply looking to engage in digital channels. They want to feel confident they'll get a great experience wherever and when they connect. So every one of those interactions is really a moment of truth. Every time you connect with a company, whether it's coming in through a web chat, through a voice call, an email, a text message, whatever it may be, those are the moments, and those are really where companies will become the winners and really become the disruptors versus the disrupted. There's another industry analyst who's mentioned that if you think you're not a digital business, you'll be out of business, and the companies that engage in the moment will win. So very much in line with what IQPC and CCW are saying as well. So basically, customer service, that's really the claim. It has failed. People have been talking about frictionless, personal, omnichannel service for years. Companies are failing to deliver, even the biggest companies. The good news is the big companies can actually be leapfrogged by the littler guys, the mid-sized companies, and we'll talk about how that can be done today. And really that is really cloud contact center. There's now capabilities for mid-sized businesses where they can have the tools and the customer insights so they can actually engage in the moment, as we talked about, across these voice and digital channels. So we'll talk about some tips here momentarily. Looking at each of us, you as a customer service leader, maybe you're the COO of your company, maybe you're the director of customer service, or you're a sales leader at your company. If you think about it, you're really in the position to help your company win because you're right at that business moment. As I mentioned, if someone comes into a web chat to your mid-sized business, they call you, they email you, they text you, they come in through your IVR or mobile app, you're right at that business moment. So in many ways, these industry analysts like CCW, IQPC, and others who are talking about the importance of the business moment to be so you can be the disruptor, you're right at that nexus. You're right at that point. So it's a little scary, but it's actually pretty exciting because it basically says that you're right at that point and how your company will win in the future.
And thanks a lot for the insight there, Ted, as well as for some of the name dropping you shared. Really appreciate seeing our quotes in your document. That's awesome. But I think that context is great. It's great to set the stage, and as you discussed, sort of put a stake in the ground and sort of challenge organizations right now to be better, to be more customer centric, and to elevate those experiences. But we did promise our audience tips to win, and so I want to dive into those one by one to really let people know that this is not just a challenge. We're not just blindly asking you to elevate the customer experience. There truly are ways to make it happen. So the first tip that I want to address, Ted, is really the way to embark on the road to omnichannel. So what are some recommendations you have for finally breaking that cycle and finally moving toward legitimate, true omnichannel engagement?
Awesome. Great question. So the first one, and this is a question I've heard from so many companies, the biggest enterprises I've worked with over the years, as well as many smaller and mid-sized companies as well. So everybody talks about omnichannel, but it's like, well, and I hear it said, Ted, how do we get started? How do you make this happen? Because there's so many channels. Where do I begin? And one of the things that I've seen, and actually from companies who've actually been part of that 5 to 10% who are actually doing true omnichannel and are some of the most innovative and easy companies to work with, I call it sort of the 80-20 rule, and it's really just get started. Get started on omnichannel. And what I mean by that is typically you're going to want to get your top 2 channels working as one. So look at your business and sort of say, well, where does 80% of the interactions come from? So maybe even do take a look at a journey map, or just take a look at your data and see where the interactions are occurring. What we typically see, and that I've typically seen in most mid-sized companies, is unless you're maybe in high tech, it's typically getting your voice channel working with your next most important channel, such as chat. So for example, if somebody is chatting with you and they're maybe looking to buy a new TV, going back to that analogy, and suddenly they need more help, and the chat person can't help them, doesn't have the expertise. When you call in, the person might say, hey, Brian, noticed you were last chatting and looking at TVs on our website. Would you like to be routed to a person who's an expert in TVs? So that's sort of the idea of getting your top 2 channels working as one. Take a look at your top 2. Get them working as one single unified conversation that's easy. And the nice thing is once you've got that put in place, you can add other channels later, whether it's email, text, Facebook Messenger, video chat, whatever it may be. So get those first 2 channels working as one is the top and first tip.
So Ted, I heard you use words like easy, and throughout your initial part of the presentation you talked about frictionless. And it's interesting because one of the things we often say is that effort on the back end results in frustration on the front end. And so when you're thinking about tips for winning the customer service game, naturally you're going to want to start to think about how you can create a more seamless experience for your employees. So what are some recommendations there?
Wow, Brian, I love that quote. I'm going to have to write that one down, and I'll give you a credit if I ever quote you again. That's a great one. So the first tip, it really starts with the agents. If you don't have happy agents and happy employees, you're not going to have happy customers. And that really starts with really reducing their friction and making it easy for them to see what's happening. So what we've got here, a couple pictures here. The one on the far right is an example of an omnichannel agent desktop, and you can actually see what's circled there are some of the interactions that happen to be some SMSs at the top and then some web chats. And then if you look at the other diagram, that's an example of where you actually have a little gear, which is a bot conversation, and then that's escalated to a human into a chat. So the first thing is to really give the ability for every customer, or for every agent and every employee in your company to see the current customer's journey with full context from each channel. So if they were maybe texting you and then they came in on a chat, or they were talking to a bot and then they're chatting with you, or they called in, giving them the ability to see every step in that current journey makes it much easier for them to serve that customer. And that really starts with a simple, unified desktop to make communicating easier and more personal. And the nice thing is, when you make it easier for your agents and employees, the customers are then going to have low effort on their preferred channels, and they won't have to repeat information. And then the great thing, too, is this is an example here where the agent or the employee can see the current journey, but it's also great if you can actually have like a tab on the desktop where you can actually see that customer's lifetime journey. So you might actually see, if they're a gold customer, what they bought in the past or what they're looking for. So having the ability to look at the journey at the micro level in the current journey, as well as at the macro level over their lifetime, makes it really much easier for employees to offer great service and sell more if you're a mid-sized company or a bigger company too.
That's certainly one element of making things easier and more valuable for employees. Another area that's certainly important is getting employees specifically dialed into the omnichannel world. And so how can you do that? How can you sort of get employees and customers in a situation where they can use their preferred channel and provide a great experience within those preferred channels?
Awesome, great question, Brian. So again, having that single unified desktop is going to make it easier for employees and agents to use the preferred channel. So we talked a little bit about having that single desktop. The other thing that's really key, though, is basically giving them the ability to use the channel they prefer. So for example, here's an example where an agent can actually start on a chat, if you look in the lower right-hand corner, and then they can escalate and move to like a text message or Facebook or whatever or voice even, whatever it may be. So really giving somebody the ability, the employees and the customers, their ability to use that preferred channel. So putting the ability on your website where a customer can text you or chat with you or send you a message via Facebook Messenger. And then conversely, giving your agents and your employees that same ability to communicate across those different channels is really key. Another tip I'd recommend.
Well, Ted, you liked my earlier cliche quote. I hope you like this one as well. So another one that we talk about is we must perform for our employees before they can perform for our customers. And so what does it take to perform for our agents?
I think that's a great question. I think it really starts with we've got to help our agents. I mean, I still remember at one of the CCW events a couple of years ago where the comment was made by one of the main stage speakers, Brian, might have been you or Mario, but it was this idea that your employees are really the CEO of your company. And so we've got to help our people because they represent your company from the consumer's perspective. So this whole idea of giving agents help, we talked about having a unified desktop already, but the other thing that's really interesting, and we're actually seeing that AI is now available not just for the biggest enterprises, but even for mid-sized companies. So here's an example on the right where a person maybe starts chatting with a bot and then it escalates to a human. But what's interesting is those agents can basically get help from the bot. So here's an example of a chat, and here's someone coming in this example, they're saying, hey, I'd love to go to Maui someday. And this one is ironic enough because I'm actually going to be there with my wife and kids over the holidays coming up. But when they actually chat Maui, the natural language processing can actually make some suggestions, such as, hey, maybe we recommend the Westin Kaanapali, or have you heard about the Maui Seaside Hotel? So this idea where natural language understanding can actually provide suggestions to an agent and an employee. And this could be for a text message response. It could be an email response. It could be a chat. It could be any channel, essentially. So this idea of it's robots versus humans, well, it's actually not. It's actually robots will be helping humans, and they can help make the conversation easier and faster as well. So that's really another trend we're seeing. Bots were the fastest growing channel in the current year. Unfortunately, one of the leading industry analysts is actually predicting that 40% of the bots being deployed right now this year are going to be yanked out because the quality is poor. But when you actually can unify them, as we've talked about so far today, you can actually make the bots work in a seamless conversation to really help those customers. So again, we got to help our agents. That starts with tools such as the unified omnichannel desktop we talked about and some of the other capabilities. But it's also things like AI, which is now available to mid-sized businesses. So some pretty cool stuff happening.
Yeah, and I like this concept too, Ted, because you're really focusing on, when you're talking about giving agents help, it's not just giving them exactly what to say. I know some people talk about bots and internal automation tools in that context, and there are some situations where that's valuable. There's some scenarios where it's great just to provide suggested or recommended responses. But when you're talking about giving agents help, you really want to talk about empowering them to start to think more critically, to start to connect with customers, giving them bits of insights, bits of wisdom, bits of knowledge that they can then use to internalize and figure out how to proceed next with customers, how to tailor that knowledge in a more personal way. It gets agents thinking as opposed to just regurgitating or repeating, and that's where AI and that's where a lot of technology right now can be so valuable, because we want our agents to be able to make connections. We want them to handle more complex issues. We want them to deliver personalization, and yet if all we're doing is giving them complex situations where they have to look information up, or alternatively, just telling them exactly what to say, we're not really allowing that to happen. And so the idea of giving agents help is really about empowering them to start to focus on the thinking, the connecting, and not just the scripted knowledge that they have to kind of present out there.
Awesome. Yep.
Definitely, and so, you gave us a lot of requirements, and I jumped in as well, but, obviously that's, again, sort of a scenario of, here are a bunch of things you need to do. Here are a bunch of things that if you take these steps, these will lead to a better customer experience. This will lead to happier agents. This will lead to more opportunities to connect with customers. This will help you become more omnichannel. We all want that, but how do you actually achieve that? What tools exist? What operational changes do you need to make so that you can actually turn these ideas, these goals, these ambitions into realities within your organization? And so what we want to look at for a moment here are some of the requirements, things that you need to look for in your contact center, in vendor partners, to know what it takes to actually deliver this competitive customer experience that truly does give you an advantage.
Awesome. So we'll get into things to look for. Brian, a quick thing before we jump into these. I wanted to like what you just said about how important the people are, and we almost need a different term than agents. We've called them customer service representatives, but quite frankly, I wonder if we're not doing them an injustice. Maybe companies need to think of them as your company concierge or whatever it may be, because these are the people, especially now as we get more digital as businesses. These are the front line. These are the CEOs of your company in effect. But this idea of like helping agents and really changing the mindset, I think has really has been a key trend. But in terms of the technology and what to look for, the first I think is really key, and it might sound a little trite, but it's actually very, very important, is this idea of an all-in-one solution where you can have your voice channels, you can have your traditional channels like email and text and chat, but also emerging channels like Facebook Messenger. These messaging channels, by the way, are predicted to surpass chat in the next couple of years. So just as chat suddenly became the next hot thing and then bots became the next hot thing, there's a lot of new things like asynchronous messaging and some of these new channels that are just exploding right now. And if you can put it in a single all-in-one solution, it's so much easier for your business to add new channels. It's so much more cost-effective. You don't have to have a bunch of bolt-ons. As you start bolting on, that's part of the reason companies are not doing true omnichannel. 90% of them up to are not doing true omnichannel is they basically are stuck in silos from old premise-based technology or older cloud technologies that are truly silos. They're not true omnichannel. So the all-in-one solution is the first thing that I think is absolutely key. It just makes it so easy. It allows mid-sized companies to deliver things that the big guys can't, and it also makes you much more nimble. Secondly, easy to deploy. A lot of companies say it in words, but the real litmus test is, can you do it? Can you put it in days or weeks? And that's really key. You want the vendor to be able to say, yes, we can do that. The next one is actually a pretty revolutionary one. Nimble and no cost to make changes. So there's a lot of even current cloud technologies that if you actually ask, well, how long is it going to take and what's it going to cost? The entry price sounds pretty reasonable, but when you suddenly realize that you need an army of professional services or IT, that's a deal killer. It can double the cost in initial implementation, but also in the longer term as you make changes. So ideally you want a system that basically, you remember the Salesforce, no software? Well, imagine a logo of no professional services. If there's a vendor who can actually give you a cloud solution that doesn't require professional services and allows business users to make changes. So for example, we have Black Friday coming up soon. What if a business user can actually go in and flip a switch in the system within minutes through like a scenario builder and say, hey, if it's a gold customer coming to my website on Black Friday, let's give them a proactive chat to greet them personally versus other customers who may be directed to self-service. So the ability for business users like you and me to make the changes versus having to bring in people where it takes time and money to make those changes, that can make companies much more nimble and makes it much more easier. And then the next point about born from the cloud, a true microservices 3.0, a lot of people talk about it, but a lot of the technology out there right now is actually ported from prem solutions. And it's basically just hosting what was previously a premise solution. So a lot of the pitfalls in terms of nimbleness and cost and so forth are inherent in those approaches. So really looking at a born from the cloud, something that was built from day one to have all channels native cloud, that's really key. And then a couple last points, obviously making it very simple, like point and click to connect to your CRM or your workforce management solutions. And then, of course, easy and low cost. It has to be easy and low cost. And so many of the solutions out there today, even the cloud ones, they might sound like they're low cost with the initial seat prices, but in terms of making changes, the cost can double or triple or be a factor of some of the other solutions. So there's just sort of a quick checklist of some of the things that I've seen and that I'd recommend for mid-sized businesses. And there are also things that I think people like yourself, Brian, and some other key analysts would point to as well.
Now, that's all very useful advice, Ted. Every one of those points makes sense because every one of those points ties directly to a real business need, a real customer need, a real agent need. But I'm going to be honest, I have a feeling some of what you said may speak specifically to the Bright Pattern solution. And that's great. That's fine. Our belief in your solution is why we're so thrilled to be working with you, whether it's on these webinars, whether it's part of our reports. But for the sake of our audience, I need to hold you accountable here. I need to know if you have any case studies that prove that Bright Pattern is successfully partnering with companies to actually help them win the customer service game.
Great. So let's get into that. So, we actually work with a lot of the big guys too, like the Mercedes and Hitachi, American Girl, and I could go down some other ones, number of customers globally. But I actually think one of our biggest sweet spots is actually the mid-size businesses, some of the mid-size companies. And we work even here, being in the Bay Area, we work with some pretty cool, innovative, high-tech companies across different industries. So I wanted just to share a couple of examples of some companies that, really are more in the mid-size arena that are doing it today. So the first one is it's a home security startup, Canary, and they're really looking to revolutionize how customer service is delivered. And they were looking, they had a Zendesk system, but they needed something that would allow them to engage more in the moment with their customers. So they were looking for a true omnichannel solution. And they wanted to work with someone who was very easy and sort of a similar mindset and DNA to their company. And so to look at some of the outcomes, basically we're able to decrease handle time by almost 10%, hold time by over 40%, and time to abandon by 65%. And I think one of the key things, I really like this quote from the head of customer experience over at Canary, where he basically talked about, none are as flexible or as customizable. And I don't want that to be a commercial for Bright Pattern, but to me that's really one of the keys that relates back to the tips we just talked about, is it's got to be easy and flexible. And I think that's really the key takeaway here. Another example, this is in a little bit arena. I wanted to find someone in the more of the BPO space. This is a company, TrueSource Labs, and basically their mission is to offer innovative support for innovative companies, and they work from small startups or mid-sized startups to large Fortune 100 customers, and they use Bright Pattern to power their capability there. So they were looking for a very mature, scalable, omnichannel contact center solution to meet their current needs and the future needs. And they also wanted to make sure that they could actually handle a number of different customers, like in a multi-tenant environment where they might need to provide reporting for a retailer versus someone else in high tech. So this is sort of a cool company who's offering service via Bright Pattern to a number of companies. And in terms of, it was really exciting because they basically had about 3,000% growth of agents using us. They're going to be growing even more in the next year. because of like a microservices environment, basically 100% uptime, nothing comes down. And they were actually, it was pretty cool when they were awarded fastest growing company in Central Texas. And you can see they increased agent training and deployment by 50%. So these are some pretty big numbers when you look at the growth and you look at those percentages. And I think that's really what it's all about. You want to be able to move the needle as a mid-sized company, and this is a great company that's been doing that. Brian, just a couple things. I didn't want to make this by any means a Bright Pattern commercial, but I know a lot of people don't know about us. We're a new company, and I just wanted to share a little bit about who we are. Actually, the original engineering team who created Genesis many years ago and the CEO who took them public are the founders of the company, and they wanted to actually come up with a revolutionary new way to deliver fast, easy cloud customer service in a contact center. And that's really who Bright Pattern is. We've got some incredible DNA, a lot of super, super bright people, pardon the pun, in the company. And our whole mission is basically revolutionize how businesses interact with their customers. And mid-sized companies in particular are really the ones that we're so excited to work with, although we do work with a lot of large companies as well. So if you're looking for simple, easy, powerful cloud contact center, that's really who Bright Pattern is. And just to end, before basically if you're a mid-sized company and maybe you're starting out with voice and email and you want to add some of the new digital channels, you want to become a digital business, whether it's web chat, messengers, video, AI, and so forth, we'd love to be considered, because with Bright Pattern you can do it easily in weeks, and at a cost that's a fraction of the other guys. So if you're looking to be nimble, you're looking to be a nimble digital business, Bright Pattern, we feel like we've got a great solution. So anyway, enough. I don't want to make that a commercial, but just a quick overview on who we are.
Definitely appreciate that. And it is important, certainly, Ted, to provide people with an option for taking that action and taking the initiative to really deliver a great experience. And I think that the insights that you have, both from the experience within the customer contact space, as well as the passion you have for driving a great customer experience, certainly suggest that you would be a great partner for mid-sized companies, small companies, and large companies as they pursue better experiences. Now, I know we were aiming for just 30 minutes here. It was meant to be a very brief discussion, and we did go slightly above the 30-minute mark, but I'm going to break a rule for a second. I'm going to be an empowered customer service agent right now, and I'm going to say that we are going to take some time for a few questions, just because we have a lot of good ones that came through the pipeline. And so if that's all right with you, Ted, I'm going to start with this one question that is, I think, really important to the framework of today's webinar. And they're saying, this webinar was predicated on mid-sized companies being able to compete with larger ones. But what would be to stop a larger company from just taking all the best practices you shared and continuing to use their advantage, given that they have more resources, more budget, and probably more established reputation within the marketplace?
So, it's an interesting question, because you basically raise a good point. How can the mid-sized companies beat the bigger guys? And I think, well, first off, we can probably look at some logos who are big logos who are no longer in business, and we can look at some of the new disruptors, many of who I see and know here in the Bay Area that we talk about that are now have taken over. And so I think it's clearly possible for the big companies to be brought down by the mid-size and the smaller companies, a little bit of the David and Goliath, if you will. And if you ask, well, how do they do it? What's their secret? And I think, in many cases, it's a unique value prop, a unique business model, but it's also the technology they use. And I think in many ways, mid-sized companies can beat the bigger guys because they're not stuck with old technology that's maybe 20, 25 years old. They're not stuck in old silos. They basically can actually leapfrog with cloud technology ahead of the bigger companies. They can put in place things very quickly and easily without having to yank out and pull out some very sticky solutions that are incredibly costly and incredibly difficult to make changes. And I think many of the big companies are stuck. They're stuck in glue to some degree, and they're not able to be as nimble. So the mid-sized companies, I think, are actually in a prime position. And it's actually why you even see a lot of the big companies buying some of these, mid-sized disruptors, and you see it in different industries, from banking, financial services, and so forth. But and a lot of retailers are pretty innovative as well. So I think the mid-sized companies clearly have proven they can beat the big guys, and they can do it with some pretty innovative technology and obviously great products and business models.
Now, another great question we hear, Ted, concerns, what about a company that doesn't have a phone channel? You recommended pairing phone with your next most popular channel, but what if they're a digital business that only has digital channels? They only do ticketing support and live chat. Should they still prioritize on those two channels first, or should they focus on adding a phone channel, given that voice for many customers is still a preference?
That's a great example. So I would say for most mid-sized companies, what we've seen is it's typically getting voice working with the next important channel, which is typically web chat, but it could be another channel as well. But we work with a lot of high-tech companies. So, for example, I mentioned Canary, but we also work with Weebly, who's a part of Square. And you look at some of those innovative high-tech companies. I mean, these are some really innovative companies that maybe voice isn't even important to them. So in that environment, you might actually want to, you typically look at, well, what are the channels that are part of your business model? And maybe it's a Facebook Messenger, or maybe it's a text message, and maybe it's web chat. So in that environment where I mentioned getting your top two channels working together, you might pick two digital channels and work to get them working together. So for example, if someone's chatting with you on a particular download on your website or whatever it may be, and then later you want to contact them and you text them as you're sitting on a bus or in an airplane, and that business now has all that context, so it's a seamless single conversation, a true omnichannel conversation that's easy and frictionless and personal. In that environment, if you're like a high-tech company where voice isn't important, get those other channels working as one. And the great thing, too, is with what we've talked about, where you can just turn on those other channels once you've got an all-in-one kind of platform, it makes it very easy for you to be nimble, add the channels that, who knows what the channel will be next year or 2 years. Who would have thought that bots would have gotten so hot? Who would have thought that these new messaging channels like Facebook Messenger would have grown so quickly? So we're going to just see a proliferation of more channels, and it's interesting, the channels have proliferated because service has been difficult, but ironically enough, as more channels have come onto the scene, we've only created more silos. So having the ability to really unify all these digital channels as well as voice are really key. And it's really going to be how companies are going to win if they can figure out how to put those pieces together and offer that easy personal service.
And now we have time for one more question here, Ted. So this person's talking about a lot of your tips concern the agent experience on the back end and making sure that they have a single view of the customer experience and the different channels and different customers. What are some ways to diagnose whether you have the optimal degree of agent effort on the back end so that you will be able to deliver a great experience for your customers?
I think one of the things that is really key is, it's interesting. People expect a consistent experience across industries. And I first had my eyes open to that when I was at a CCW event a few years ago, and there was a woman from a government in Canada who said, we want to be as good as Nordstrom's. And that comment forever, it was a discussion group I was leading, and it really made me smile. But today, people also expect a consistent experience across the channels. People don't want to wait 2 days for an email to be responded to. They expect it to be responded to like a chat or a text message. So I think one of the key things that's really key to make sure that all those cylinders are firing, all those channels are really offering that easy, frictionless personal experience is you need to also look at some things such as like quality management. Do you have like omni-channel quality management? Can you look across all your different channels simply, even as a mid-sized business, and see that, yeah, all those channels, if you have like a simple survey at the end of an interaction, they have a good NPS or a good CSAT, or using AI, good sentiment where there's a smiley face on those interactions. So having the ability to make sure you can see across channels that it's consistent, being able to maybe in a single report see that across journey types like sales versus marketing versus maybe another type of journey type, you can actually see that there's consistency there. And then also by customer segment, if you can actually look at your customer segment and see how does that look as well. So having a simple real-time report that lets the business see how they're doing is really key as well. So that's part of that simple, easy, and having that sort of macro view to make sure you're really, and even things like the ability to see the sentiment of your agents and employees, something that we do. We can actually look within a recording or a current conversation, and through AI, you can actually see the customer sentiment but you can also see the agent or employee sentiment. That's really key as well. So obviously that's a topic for a whole nother webinar. It's pretty in-depth, but there's some really cool stuff happening in that area as well.
Well, I want to thank you very much, Ted, and I also want to thank everyone who submitted questions. Obviously, we didn't have time to get through all those, but Ted's certainly going to be following up with you after the fact to answer whatever he can, because you can tell this guy is passionate about the subject. You can tell he's knowledgeable about the subject. And the goal here is to make it easy for you to start to compete on the customer experience, to escape that idea that this is a burden, that, oh no, suddenly we have to take the customer experience seriously, and instead say, yes, finally, every company, whether you're an established brand, whether you're an up-and-coming organization, has a chance to compete, has a chance to break existing marketplace bonds, has a chance to build a reputation that customers want to rally behind, that agents want to work for, a reputation that drives meaningful business results. And that's what this is really all about, right? It's about that opportunity. If you're a smaller or mid-sized company, if you can disrupt through the customer experience, you can compete with a more established brand. If you're an established brand, you can break that reputation that you don't care about your customers, that the customer experience is always going to be okay at best, and you can show why you deserve to be at the top of the pack. You can show why you deserve to continue connecting with customers, to continue dominating your space. So no matter where you are in the marketplace in terms of that pyramid, you have a chance to use the customer experience to create a new competitive advantage, to create a new reason for customers to want to work with you, to create a better business. For CCW Digital, I'm Brian Cantor. Thanks again for participating in today's webinar. And of course, thanks to BrightPattern for providing a solution, for providing insights, for making this competition, making this victory possible.